David. How
Hi,
are
Nessa.
you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
You have basically a first name for both your first and last name, David Johns.
Yes, that is correct. I've been called John a lot of my formal schooling years and since then as well. Yes.
I love the shirt.
Thank you so much. It is something that I truly believe in.
Why is that?
When I think about Pride Month in particular, I know a lot of people will celebrate Stonewall. People around HIV testing will think about Harvey Milk. But for me, the connection is rooted in Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans woman who was literally responsible for everything that we now claim credit for related to the LGBTQ movement. And so whether it's her or Ella Baker, who was responsible for nurturing and supporting the young talent around the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Black women and girls have always been centered to ensuring that we can be free.
How are you going to celebrate Pride Month?
So Pride is an interesting thing. When I typically think of Pride, I think of white LGBTQ people celebrating a lot of the gains that have been won in the decades since Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera started their work. And so I think about the many festivals and community events that people will have where they will draw strength from being LGBTQ. But for me, what I really want to center are conversations around equity and acknowledging that not everybody is shared in the success of the LGBTQ movement or the civil rights movement to date, right? Black people, Black LGBTQ, and I use the term same gender loving because white is a gay political identifier. It often signals things that are not necessarily important to Black LGBTQ people, right?
Oh, okay, I'm learning.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
you're teaching me.
A lot of this is about like language and phrasing, right? And so unlike the story for most white people, like what Hollywood celebrates is that like you come out, your family will support you, and then you move to a neighborhood, Chelsea, New York, or Hollywood, California, Chicago, there's Boys Town, right? Black LGBTQ SGL people live in the South. We live in spaces with other Black people. We live in states like Alabama where it's legal to discriminate right now against someone based on their perceived or actual sexual identity or gender orientation. And so in a country where we still have a lot of work to do around the intersections of race and racism and homophobia and transphobia and trans misogynoir, which is something that specifically affects Black trans women, I want us to move past the surface level celebration and really talk about making the kinds of investments that we need to ensure that everybody can be free, that everybody can celebrate showing up without apology or shrinking simply based on who we are and how we show up in the world and who we choose to love.
There's a lot of work to be done.
So much.
How do you find the motivation and strength to continue as an executive director? Now tell us a little bit more about being an executive director and your organization and what does that all mean? Yeah,
I appreciate that. So I have the pleasure of leading, I call it quarterbacking the team at the National Black Justice Coalition. We are the nation's only civil rights organization that is both intentional and unapologetic and focusing really on the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQ equality, right?
Wow, okay.
And so that's really important because before doing this work, I led an initiative for still my president, Barack Hussein Obama, his fabulous wife, Michelle Yvonne Robinson Obama, and Sasha Malia, the dogs and everyone, focused on Sunny and Bo, right? Focused on educational excellence for African Americans. That was after almost a decade of crafting policy on Capitol Hill. I worked for Senator Ted Kennedy till he passed, Tom Harkin, who was a senior leader from Iowa. And the thing that I remember is that whenever people would lobby for issues affecting Black people, Black young people in particular, they talked as if they were all heterosexual. There was never any possibility that Black people could also be LGBTQ or also have disabilities. There was just this monolithic perception. And then similarly, whenever people came to lobby us about things affecting LGBTQ youth, they assumed that everybody was white. And so this organization acknowledges that as long as there have been Black people, there have been Black LGBTQ same gender loving people, even before those terms existed. And that if we're not intentional about acknowledging that in this country in particular, the intersections of both racial and ethnic identity and sexual identity and gender orientation impact our lives in unique ways. And so the challenges that white women are having in response to the countries and in so many ways the Supreme Court's now attack on bodily autonomy is going to be very different than the experience of a Black woman. Which is also going to be very different than the experiences of Black trans women who are also women but have specific needs because of how their trans identity means they show up in the world. And so our organization focuses on covering those gaps and ensuring that the least of these are protected. And to your question about motivation, I understand that I have an incredible opportunity and responsibility to pay back the sacrifices that so many people have made, right? Like the fact that I can sit here in this moment and have this conversation with you and be equally as proud about being a Black man as I am a same gender loving man and not have to apologize or shrink or hide as a result of it it's significant.
Right.
It's
liberating.
significant. It is liberating, but I think beyond that, it's also affirming, right? Because words matter. And the thing I think about with liberation is this idea that, like, we haven't always been present and showing up and showing out, and that's seldom the case, right? What we even think about now in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement is a result of queer leadership. A guy named Dr. Marcus Hunter at UCLA is the first person to actually use the term Black Lives Matter on Twitter. And his research talks about how Black people shape space, right? We often traditionally, people in the academy talk about white people moving into a community and changing the way that that works. No, he flips it on its head. Patrisse Cullors and others, right, Black queer women are holding leaders accountable. She's amazing, right? And she, like so many other people, have been doing this work even before people celebrated them or gave them the spotlight that they so much deserve. And I hope that as we continue to celebrate Pride and find other moments to acknowledge people attached to these significant moments of celebration, that we do a better job of celebrating people who are always doing the work in and with communities who would be doing it even if they weren't celebrated.
Why is it important to help communities that, you know, are marginalized? They don't have resources. They're left out to dry. The have-nots.
Yeah.
Why is that important?
It is important for three reasons in this country. One, because it's a foundational pillar of our democracy. This promise that if you work really hard, if you do the things that, like, responsible people are supposed to do, which means so many different things in this current moment, right? But if you abide by the rules, right? That the reward is that you get to celebrate in the benefits of being here in one of the greatest countries in the world.
Right.
The second thing is we have a moral responsibility. The reality is that people who are from marginalized communities, right? Again, words matter, and we do things like call people who are women or people who come from the continent of Africa or the Caribbean minorities when technically we're global majorities.
Right.
Right? But all of this matters because in this country in particular, it affects how it is that we look at ourselves and how it is that we work with each other.
For you, I mean, everything's connected, even when you talk about health, right?
Yep.
And the access to food, the access to medical care.
Yep.
Why is this all important? And how does this affect you? And what does this mean for Pride? Like, why is it important to address all this?
Yeah, really important question.
Right? Because it's like people forget health is so important when it comes to mental and physical. Right?
Spiritual and
emotional,
financial, all of it.
What does this all mean? And why? How important is it to you?
It's essential. For me, the goal is to be, when you used the term earlier, liberated, is to be free.
Right.
And that, for me, that means being safe, happy, and whole. And in order to be whole, you have to be whole physically.
Right.
Right? You have to be whole mentally. And in particular for people of color, for women, for people who are non-natives, for people who experience housing and food insecurity, we have to be really mindful of the consequences of toxic stress and trauma.
Right.
Things that we've inherited genetically and things that affect us based on the environments that we live in. Related to your earlier point, right? Like, oppressed communities exist by design.
Absolutely.
Right. And we have a responsibility to acknowledge that. And if we do espouse to believe in freedom of opportunity for all, then we have to do the work to uncover this stuff. And so the health piece is really important. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is the importance of HIV, in particular as it continues to affect disproportionately the Black community. Since the introduction of the epidemic, Black people, all Black people, right? So I want to dispel this myth that it's a Black gay disease because it's not. Black women, cisgendered, heterosexual women are most affected out of any other community of women. And it's because we don't have access to the kinds of care and support that everybody else does. And so for years, a lot of people use myths and misinformation connected to stereotypes about Black people that has everything to do with maintaining these systems of oppression, right? Shout out to Black feminists and the Matrix of Domination. But what we know is that it's not that Black people have higher rates of HIV infection because we engage in riskier sexual behavior. In fact, data says quite the opposite. It's because we don't have access to doctors who are culturally competent, who know what it means to provide care to a Black transgender woman and not be focused on the superficial things that a medical doctor should be focused on when she comes in and says that I am interested in being tested for HIV, right? It's because, again, we live in communities that because of structural changes, things that are the result of this current administration, we don't have access to health facilities or other services provided by Health and Human Services in local communities. And so a lot of people, and I think this is really important for cisgender people, so people whose sexual identity or gender orientation is consistent with what a doctor assigned them at birth, right? Because gender is assigned.
Right.
It's not a, it's, right? It's something,
a sign.
It's a sign. It's something that people make, right? Like So what's really important for us to think about in that regard is that acknowledging that people make these decisions, we have to do things to deconstruct the systems that allow for them to happen and support people who otherwise fall by the wayside. So we talk a lot about HIV. We have a toolkit called Words Matter that's designed to give people the language like cisgender to be able to have conversations. Right, because too often we don't have these conversations. We live in a society that's hypersexualized, so people are hyper-exposed to sexual images, stories like Romeo and Juliet in high school, but then we don't talk about holistic sexual health and well-being practices, what it looks like to sit with your partner and ask, what are you doing to protect yourself and how can we protect each other? Are you using things like PrEP and PEP, a pill that you can take daily, almost like birth control, that reduces the likelihood of contracting HIV by more than 90%, right? And so a lot of this is for us is acknowledging where there are gaps and then finding ways to develop resources to fill them for people.
So how can someone help? Like, someone who's like myself, I want to help, the LGBTQ community. I want to understand more how this affects you and what this means. Like what's the first step? What can we do?
The first step is to have conversations. Is to invite people into discussions that you might have on a text thread with your friends or after watching an episode of Pose. It's to be really humble and acknowledging that nobody knows everything and we have a lot to learn. And that if we celebrate the diversity and the beauty of all of us, that we can be better together. And so having conversations with people about their experience, not to create stereotypes about them or characters about how you think they might show up, but really to seek to learn. The second thing is to seek to be an accomplice in shifting systems so that people can otherwise be free.
What does that mean?
So it means that a lot of people will use the term ally and wear it as a badge of honor to say, like, I have done something to support them. But even in the process of doing that, you're otherizing yourself and separating yourself from the community that you're otherwise seeking to support. And so for so many people who claim to be allies of the LGBTQ, SGL, IA+ community, signaling that you're an ally just says, I'm not one of them. And then beyond that, unless you do something like have some skin in the game or otherwise leverage your privilege.
So I want to be an accomplice.
You want to be an accomplice, right? So what that means is you leverage your privilege.
I'm running out here.
Right? And you got to do it. So that means that, so on a daily basis, when you hear somebody say something derogatory about a trans person or a queer person, you can use your privilege to disrupt that. Don't use that term and then let's talk about it now. When we see people being accosted based on how they show up in the world, we can find ways to interrupt that. We can be much more proactive about civic engagement and having conversations about the importance of voting in every election, not just focus on the presidential, so we can avoid things happening like what's happening in Alabama. And we can also just create more space for people to talk about marginalization and oppression. Too often right now in America today, people are hypersensitive, and me even mentioning race and racism is an invitation for somebody to talk about all the ways that I'm unpatriotic or otherwise intelligent.
I mean, that's how racists hide.
That's exactly right.
Behind,
that's exactly right.
Being bigots.
That's exactly right.
That's how they hide, they deflect what the real issue is.
And Aniala says you have to name a thing. Right? And so using toolkits like our Words Matter toolkit, otherwise finding ways to increase cultural competence. We do a lot of work with HBCUs where we work with senior leaders to increase their ability to support LGBTQ students, but actively taking steps to do work so you can hold space for and unlock doors for and invite otherwise marginalized people to sit at the table, even if it means giving them your seat, is what it means for me to be an accomplice.
What do you want people to know? Because I think it's important that, hearing from you, understanding why this is important to you. I mean, what do you want people to know? Because I think it's important. It's not about what I want to know. But what do you want people to know?
I want people to know that there is a young boy named Nigel Shelby, who is a freshman in Alabama, who in every picture I have seen and every conversation I've had with people who have known and loved him was filled with joy. He struggled to live in a world where adults continue to fail to take responsibility for the problems that we've created. And so he showed up at school and talked about being bullied and had adults tell him that he was being dramatic and that it would get better. He worked with his mother to try and grapple with what it means to live in a world where everybody tells you that you're not normal, even though that doesn't even exist. And I, in this moment, working with his mother and his family to ensure that Nigel's legacy means that fewer young Black, LGBTQ, disabled, uniquely not normal babies are able to learn and grow and find and fall in love and make the kind of friendships with people who affirm the most important parts of yourself. And so I hope that anybody who is uniquely not normal, in particular who is both Black and LGBTQ, IA+, or same gender loving, or whatever term you're using, I just want them to know that I see them. And I understand that it is incredibly difficult just to show up in the world, right? James Baldwin said some time ago, and I carry with me, that to be Black and relatively conscious is to almost always be in a constant state of rage. And there's no way in hell you can have access to technology, our TV, our community, and not know that people are literally under attack.
Right.
And so as people think about like pride and celebrations, in particular people that have privilege because they are cisgendered and heterosexual, and the world literally is built to support you, I want you to understand that you have to do the work.
Right.
Right. Too often we talk about Black queer people needing to like become more resilient, and we say things to them like, just persist, it'll get better. And it's an absolute lie. Unless and until people in positions of power and with privilege leverage it to dismantle these systems that protect and preserve them, none of us will get free.
How would you like me, who wants to be an accomplice, who feels that is part of my calling, how do you want us to celebrate Pride? Because I think it's important not just to go out to the parades and just, I think it's great, the celebration's great, but what else would you want to see?
Yeah, I've got three things. One is joy is important,
Of course.
And so dancing and expressions of freedom are essential, and I want people to appreciate and celebrate in that. But I also want people to invite in and to center in those processes Black, queer, Latinx, queer, non-native, queer people who often do the work without the credit. Like, let's shift and do that. The second thing is I want people to make space for our babies to just be. Like the fact that I think about Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade and the amazing things that they're doing with their baby Zion, right? A counterpart to what we saw happen with our lack of responsibility with Nigel. The fact that we as a society are fascinated with what Zion may or may not be is crazy making.
Yes.
He is a child who should be free to just be.
Just be a child.
Right.
Live, just
Let him
be
live.
joy.
But the fact that he has two Black parents who are radical in their intentionality with loving him in spite of what the world says is something that, like, sadly we have to celebrate. And so the second thing that I want people to do is to make space for our babies, especially our Black babies, to just experience joy. Too often they're in schools. I'm in a PhD program now at Columbia University. My doctoral work is literally about how schools themselves are sources of trauma for our kids. They're not the problem, the schools are. And so by us making space for our babies to do a better job of understanding how to identify early warning signs of depression or other mental health challenges, and having conversations with them, seeking to listen and learn, is super important, and not just to judge. So that would be the second thing. And then the last thing, very selfishly, is to invest in organizations that do the work but often don't get the credit. And so most people, when they think about Pride Month, and will think about like advocacy organizations or civil rights organizations doing this kind of work, we'll think about HRC. HRC is important, they do incredible work, but there's not another organization like the National Black Justice Coalition, right, who gets called to stand in when Black trans women are not served at restaurants, or when Black queer mothers are not able to take their daughter to be provided medical services in a hospital. And so finding ways to support our work, in particular because the previous support that existed in other administrations doesn't exist now, would selfishly be the thing that would be most helpful.
Best piece of advice for someone who wants to erase the hate and they want to, again, just what can they do? What's the first step? Because, it's so overwhelming. Because there's so much that needs to be done. So someone who's watching and they're encouraged and they're just like, okay, so what can I do?
What I would say is the real simple, play your position. I think too often the burden of feeling like that we're responsible for boiling the ocean or solving all problems becomes suffocating and really constricts anybody's ability to do anything. And so by acknowledging that we all have some form of biases or stereotypes that affect others, and then seeking out organizations like the National Black Justice Coalition, or advocates who have lived experience and have earned credentials through their post-secondary courses of study, to help you in this process is the thing that's most important. But it's going to look different for different people, right? I want to be clear that not everybody should think that they can do my job.
Right.
It is not easy, to say the least, but I'm clear that this job invites me to bring the best parts of myself, to show up to try and support people in ways that I'm uniquely able to. And so whether or not that's you having a conversation with somebody who you've never otherwise had a conversation with, challenging people and organizations that you are a part of, whether that be Black Greek letter organizations. There was a recent conversation about Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated excluding trans women, right? Having conversations about how we shift faith communities and Black congregations so that we are much more intentional and being supportive of people who we sometimes just simply tolerate. Like doing the simple, what seem to be simple, but everyday things that we too often overlook is a thing that I want everybody to do. So just do something in your unique way.
Thank you for everything you're doing, because you're doing the work. You know, and it's thankless, and it's long, and it's tiring, but you are doing it with such grace and a smile on your face, and you're motivating us, and you know, you're also holding that mirror up to everybody, because these are real issues that are happening, and it needs to be handled, and we need to be unapologetic when it comes to social justice. So you're doing the work, and you know, thank everybody that's with you, that's on this thankless journey, because
it's not as celebrated as it should be, but I will honor that.
Yes,
I am the beneficiary of people that conspire for my success. Right, I had a Black male teacher in the 5th grade who sat with me and answered the questions that my white teachers just said were crazy. Right, weekly I try and sit with students in schools who were brilliant and who were taking up space and challenging us to do better. Right. More than 50% of kids in high school now identify as anything other than strictly heterosexual. And I also, every now and again, get notes from people that just say, like, keep on keeping on, right? That our ability to challenge people, to challenge their hearts and change their minds matters. And so I just want to acknowledge them and say thank you.
I gotta do some work. I gotta go do something. But thank you so much for being here today.
Pleasure.
Thank you for everything that you're doing. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for everything.